everyone. Welcome to the latest installment of MSP Business School. As always, I'm Brian Doyle, and with me today, and this is a very exciting day because I think it's been a while since the three of us have gotten together on one of these. I've got Tim and Rob with me today. What is going on, boys?
The three amigos, we're finally together.
You know, it's so nice to
see you guys back. Has it happened this year yet?
Yeah, I think we may have had one or two in 2023 where we've all been together, but it's been a while, and you know, what a better way to celebrate the second day of spring, right? You know, it only took us an entire season to make it.
That's right. Getting the band back together, fellas.
That's it. And now that we got the band back together, this allows us to get a little deeper in the roundtable discussions. So today we're going to talk about something that obviously Tim and Rob are experts at. This really falls into kind of the core of their services, but it's a challenge that I see for a lot of technical founders out there. And that's, how do you conduct a proper one-on-one with your salesperson? And I've got a bunch of questions on this one because I think the one-on-one process opens up a lot of interesting doors for a lot of interesting perspectives. I'm being very kind in saying that. Some are fiction, some are nonfiction. It's really interesting, and I think that's what we really got to cover off on. Is in these one-on-ones, not only how do you conduct them, but how do you know when you're being sold as the technical founder, right? Let's get down to it. So, with that, Rob, Tim, I don't know who wants to lead off on this one today.
I'll go first. I'll jump in here and talk about this. And Tim has a lot of insightful information on this as well. This is kind of like, as you said, Brian, this is our lifeblood for the company. The way you look at a one-on-one from a sales perspective is it's not about speeds and feeds. It's not about the past, all the calls that you made, what was the result of those calls. That's just part of it. If you think about your one-on-one broken down into three different parts, you do have to talk about, the past, the present, and the future. But one of the biggest things that employers typically miss, and this is a technical owner I'm referring to, is part of the one-on-one is always a head check. Salespeople have highs and lows. If you think about it, they make 80 calls in a day and only 5 people talk to them, right? So they're talking to a lot of people that are saying no. Yeah, if they're lucky, that's a good day. But you're talking to all these people and they're all hanging up on you. So, you can get kind of down. So one of the things that you do, at least on a weekly basis, to start off the meeting is, how's your head, right? And you guys talk about that a little bit. And then the next thing that before the manager is heard or the owner is heard, you must first find out what's going on with the sales rep. So we haven't even gotten into speeds and feeds. We haven't gotten into any of the data, any of the things that you can just get out of a report. First, you're checking their head, and then you're asking them if there's anything that they would like to talk about, right? And then that's how you kind of start off the meeting, with understanding them before you're understood. Timmy, is that how you do it?
Yeah, I mean, look, you want to know, it can be a very tough world being a salesperson in the MSP industry, especially most salespeople, they're an island to one, right? So you as the MSP owner, or if you have like a fractional sales manager or something similar to what we do at OSR, it's just really important to have that head check to make sure that everything's okay. I mean, it's being a salesperson in general, and I'm not even talking about the MSP world, but just in general, being a salesperson, like Rob said, it has really large peaks and valleys. I mean, the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, sometime all in the same day, within the same hour, right? So you really need to go in understanding what their mindset is for that day. And it's something that we've actually seen more and more, oddly enough, more and more peer groups doing. They start a peer group with, how's your head? If you were to, one of the questions that's a really good question to ask that I use often is 1 to 10. How you feeling today? Basically, where's your head on a 1 to 10? Anything under 8 or any 7 or 8, it's, you got to dig a little, what's going on, because it's really important, especially when you're making those calls all day, every day.
Yep.
That's an interesting perspective on where to start, because I think sometimes we overlook how is that person feeling in general, right? The MSP world moves so quickly. There's changes coming, things being thrown at us every minute of the day. And sometimes we forget to do those periodic check-ins. And certainly if you've got a sales rep that's, I guess, coming to you guys consistently week after week, that they're discouraged, that's a pretty big red flag too, and can help you make some other decisions. So, step 1, action item number 1, check their head.
Yeah, it's the absolutely, and it's the hardest thing for the owners, because usually owners like myself, like Tim, like you, Brian, we're all high D. If you think about that disc profile, we're bullet point. We want to move through everything. We just boom, 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 let's move. And we don't think about it from their perspective. So it's a good way to have yourself a checklist and just make that as your number 1 question before you move on. Speeds and feeds are important, right? Because you got to understand if they're BSing you. But the number 1 thing you do, ask them where their head's at. And number 2, do they have anything that they want to discuss today? Get those things off of their chest first, then you can jump into all the things that you typically do.
Yeah.
Awesome. So what would be the next thing that you think should go into a one-on-one?
Yeah, I'll lead off here, Timmy.
Yep.
The first thing that you always have to do, the manager never comes to the meeting with the numbers. The rep has to come to the meeting with the numbers. The rep has to understand their numbers, and the manager or the owner is there to go through the numbers with them that the rep had to do. Does that make sense? I kind of like went around in a circle there. Rep brings the numbers, brings the report to the manager.
Makes perfect sense to me, because the rep's responsible for bringing in that business. I mean, if they're not sure of what their numbers are, how am I supposed to be sure of what their numbers are as the sales manager, right? And it can also possibly ferret out some false pipeline too, right? Because I might be seeing things that I think are legitimate. If they're not reporting on it, it's probably illegitimate. But we know it usually doesn't go in that direction.
Right.
Yeah, and look, there's a lot of salespeople out there that it's true with anybody, not just salespeople. They expect somebody else to do the work for them, right? Especially when it comes to those reports. What does the pipeline look like? You want somebody who's money driven in a sales seat, whether it's an account manager or more on the hunting side. And I promise you on my family that there was not a time where I went to a pipeline meeting or whatever back in the day where I didn't know exactly what could close in the next 30 days. Now, like any salesperson, I'm sure I was able to make that look a little bigger, but I always knew what was realistic, right? And as an MSP owner going into a one-on-one, if you have a salesperson that truly doesn't understand, or is just, you can tell is just providing guesswork to a funnel, you've got to start looking into that more. And that's when you start looking at time on phone, how many outreaches, how many decision makers, things like that.
I love that concept of also them bringing that, because you want to understand how money motivated they are and what is driving them. I had a sales rep once, and this was one of the coolest things I ever saw. Not only did he maintain his spreadsheet of what his pipeline looked like, but he already had his potential commission in that column too, because he was tracking whether or not he was going to stay on track to make what he needed to make the family run the way he wanted it to. So it was like it was a double thing, because I knew he also wasn't the guy putting in false pipeline, because he was tracking it for his own means. And I tried to get some other sales reps to do that afterward. And you should have seen how many people moaned and groaned about having to do a simple math equation that you would think every sales rep would know.
That's my money. I like that. That's my number 1 goal in life, is to know where I'm, what I'm bringing in and how I'm going to bring it in. It's a big red flag. I agree with you, Brian, that people, if they're not tracking it, why, it's their money.
Yeah.
Look, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, even though not every salesperson necessarily is money driven, they still have to provide for whatever they're providing for, whether it's a family, whether it's for themselves. They should know that left, right, and center every single time you go in and meet with them. They need to know that. And
Yeah.
it should be on them to find that out or to figure it out, to have that estimate in their head.
Yeah. Brian, you kind of brought up fluff a little bit earlier. And, how does the owner know if they're getting fluffed, right?
Right.
And there's a general rule that you can use, and we've been using this rule for a long time. And it's broad, but it's a pretty good rule. It's called the 8-6-4-1 rule. And this is in a timeline. This isn't in a month. If somebody gets 8 appointments, 6 of those are going to turn into on-sites, technical meetings, right? 4 of those are going to turn into a proposal, and 1 is going to close. Now, that could take 3 months, could take 6 months for those 8 appointments to get fleshed through. But if your rep is not generally within those numbers, then there is a breakdown at one of those spots, right?
Yep.
So, and that's kind of how you know if a rep is fluffing you. That's number one. Number two, the probably the biggest way a rep fluffs, and you've got to understand if you're getting, kind of getting the short end of the stick here, is if they spend all their time talking about the one deal that they're working on. If that one big elephant is what they spent all their time in their one-on-one talking to you about, raise your red flags, because they're just trying to sell you on what they on the positive thing, right? They need to talk about, this is how many calls I made, this is how many went to appointments, this is how many went to on-site technical meeting, proposal, and this is what I have in the likely for the next 30 days. Just like that.
So I want to dive into that for a moment, right? We talk about, the fluff, I think we all know, and I love the concept of the 8-6-4-1 rule, right? Because it puts some metrics to it that a non-technical sales manager or somebody stepping into that role can measure to. And, I certainly like that part about that one big deal, right? Because if I got a pipeline of 10 things and I'm hyping up the one that's obviously the biggest, and I'm hyping up the one that's the biggest because that's the one that's going to save me from all the zeros that I've got cascading down.
Exactly.
We need to get to that, right? And not, I always want to be clear, not all reps do this, of course. But, you can see when a rep's in a desperate mode, and when they're in that desperate mode, they will cling on to that. So that's a great call out there, Rob.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's easy to do as the sales rep. It's easy to do. And it's easy to sit there and say, yeah, but I got this really big one. And they told us this, or they told us that, and the next meeting is now, or it's at that point. And it's easy to go down that path and focus too much on the large deals, right?
So Tim, let me ask you, I'm just thinking about this here. Let me ask you this question. So they're focusing on this large deal. How do you keep them on track with that? How do you make sure they've got a next step? How do you make sure that it's just not getting kick can? Maybe you can elaborate a little bit how you get those controls in place.
Yeah, I mean, that's, God, I can still think back even to when we were in the industry, however many years ago at this point. Just a few, I would call them whale accounts that I would chase after. Depending on how large the company is, depending on how many people you need to sit with, because larger the company, the more people you generally have to sit with, whether they're influencers or C-level or whatever that might be. Always having a next step in place and on the calendar. The next step can't be, yeah, I got to email them later this week or something like that. It has to be a defined next step that everybody is aware of, everybody has agreed to. And if that next step isn't met for whatever reason, there better be a damn good reason why, at least on the sales rep side, why it didn't happen, right? And, meetings get missed, meetings get changed, those kinds of things happen, but it's just really important that there's always a next step on the books. And it's not just I got to reach out to him next week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
I'm glad you traveled down that lane, because one of the things that I used to experience from time to time when I was managing, the sales team was, oh yeah, they had to cancel the meeting. Okay, so when's the next meeting? Well, they got to get back with the team to kind of put that all together. And that's when, I would get my antenna up, because it was like, no, if they're canceling, they're coming, so let's go there.
Yeah.
Now, we spent some time on fluff. What would be the next step in a one-on-one?
Okay, so you on a weekly basis, it's more of just, where's your head? Do you have anything? Follow the metrics, and is there anything I can help you unstuck? right? That's how it works. In part of the thing that Tim was just talking about, if you don't have a next step built within 6 weeks, if you've been ghosted for 6 weeks, it's out of the funnel and it's back into your prospecting. It's no longer, it's a on hold, or it's old, or it's a lost deal.
Yes.
But on a monthly basis, you have to talk about what they're doing for their quarterly rocks. Quarterly rocks are for salespeople too. And the quarterly rocks are how to improve the rep over the long term, and how to get them into the next position that you have in your company. So once a month, you have to go over their quarterly rocks. Did they read that book? Where are they at with that book that they were going to read? Where are they at with that class that they're going to take? They had one quarterly rock for this quarter, and that is to improve themselves somehow. And we talk about it on a once per month basis to finish it by the quarter.
Yeah, just think of it like a degraded EOS weekly meeting, right? Like a level 10, but just like a hybrid of a level 10 meeting if you're an EOS, or if you're an EOS company out there.
Yeah. And it could be anything, Brian. It doesn't have to be a book. It doesn't have to be a class. It could be they wanted to get themselves into one networking group, right? Or they wanted to build one circle of influence this quarter. How are you coming along with that? And that's a once a month check-in.
Well, I mean, really, it's just getting them to commit to an action and see them follow through, right?
Yeah.
Because, sales is a follow up and follow through business.
Oh, yeah.
And, and if you can't do it for something you're committing to your boss, what are the chances that you're doing it consistently with your tougher deals, right? And doing those follow ups. So, no, I think that's great. Guys, anything else? I know we're getting near the end of time here. Anything else you want to add? And, before we close up shop?
I'm on my end, what I would say is, just as an MSP owner or being on a leadership team, if you're going into these one-on-ones on a regular basis with the salesperson, just know that, I mean, you should already know this going in, right? But just know that they are not always going to be the same personality type as your techs or your engineers. It's going to be a very different conversation. And you've got to account for that. And you've got to be a little more, I think everybody would agree, most techs and engineers are a little more black and white by nature. Salespeople like to talk and banter. You've got to go in knowing that and make that salesperson feel welcome, because it's very easy. Like I'd mentioned early on, and when we first started the podcast, it's really easy to forget that a lot of these salespeople, they're an island of one. And oftentimes the only people that they're talking to on a daily basis are the prospects who hang up on them on a regular basis. So just go in with empathy, verify all the data, and make sure that things are above board. I mean, those are all important aspects when you have a salesperson on staff.
Yeah. And I would just leave you with this, Brian. There's two main things you need to get out of this meeting today. When you can't just track wins, right? If you were just tracking wins, that's just, did they win or did they not? How did they get to that win or that loss is your job as their manager, because you have to coach them up in the places that they're deficient. And that's what a manager is supposed to do, not just verify that they hit the number or they didn't hit the number. Track all the numbers, number one. Number two, track the numbers in a historical 12 to 13 weeks in a row, so you can see a consistent average over time to see what they're really doing. It's not good just to say, this is what they did this week, and you forgot that 4 weeks ago they didn't do anything, or they blew it out of the water, and now 4 weeks later they're not doing anything. Well, what's wrong? What happened? Those are the things that you need to find out. That's a coach, right? And that's what you need to do.
All right. So, listener, I'm going to close it out with a recap here, and then I'm going to throw it to you, Rob, to take us home. Okay. So, step one in the one-on-one process: check their head. Make sure you understand what the temperature is and where they're sitting right now and how they're feeling. Step two, rep brings the numbers, not you. This is a great way to identify whether or not they've got a good handle on their pipeline, and will also help you identify things that you thought were in their pipeline that might not be real. Which leads us to the big number three, which is really the 8641 rule, which is really making sure that we are getting real about what's in our pipeline and we're not focused on that one big deal. Step four is, if they are struggling, help them get unstuck. figure out how you can coach them up, what you're going to do to help them get out of that mode. And then, of course, make sure that they're tracking their ROC, and make sure you issue them a ROC each quarter. And then finally, track those wins and losses, because it's a cyclical process, right? We're not, the sales rep that can sell exactly what they're supposed to every month doesn't exist. So you got to make sure that you're seeing where those peaks and valleys are going to be and help them with the wins and losses. But more importantly, you're understanding those wins and losses so you can start getting a sense of what you should really expect out of that person. So those are the 5 big ones, guys. Awesome job. I really, I think this is a very helpful, podcast for the technical founder who's found themselves as a sales leader all of a sudden.
Sure. No problem. I love doing these things, Brian. I love talking about this stuff.
Yep. So with that said, Rob, unfortunately, I got to take your talk time away. We're done for today.
I know.
We'll give you one last chance. Take us home.
All right, no problem. We will be putting this episode up on YouTube, everybody. So please go there, check us out, like, subscribe, hit that bell button.
Smash
we really appreciate
the bell.
Smash the bell. We will be including this up on MSP Business School as well, as we always do. And Brian, Tim, this has been a fantastic episode. I wish you all the best, fellas.
It's time to go. It's time to go.
Time to go.
That's it.
Till next week, all. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you again.
All right.